Great, great. Thank you so much, Lalit. And really sorry, everyone, for this delay. Okay, let's not waste any more time and let's get started. Um, okay, so I will be talking about identity economics. Before I start, has anyone heard of it or has an idea what identity economics is? I would like to be an interactive session, so please, otherwise it'll just be me talking to a computer screen. Yes, I heard someone was going to say something, Samvit. Yes.
No, ma'am.
No? Okay. So, next slide, please, Lalit. I can request control and then you can give me the control. Let's see. Okay. So, all right. So what do we know in economics till now? So I know that one of you is from mathematics, but still we know something about economics, right? So there's a creature in economics who is called Homo economicus, right? So what is Homo economicus? It's a term devised by us only. So Homo economicus is basically next just click next. Yes. So Homo economicus is a rationally optimizing human with only economic motivations. So what do we how did we deal with economics right now? That there are individuals in the society and everyone has some economic motivations. You want some income, you have some consumption, you want a certain quantity of a certain good and you are very rational about it, right? Uh, I'll tell you what rational means. So rational means that you have a utility function. Now, what are utility functions? As we did in our undergraduate courses, a utility function is just a mathematical expression that characterizes what people care about. Okay, so it can be you can care about anything. As you remember in your microeconomics courses, POE courses, that I care about apples or I care about oranges, and that goes into my utility function. I derive utility um, when I consume those objects. It could be income, it could be your savings, it could be anything, right? So a utility function is just a mathematical way to express anything that motivates you. So it's a formal way to describe a motivation, and it can be any motivation, right? Um, and what this Homo economicus does is that she is basically maximizing this utility function. So given some constraint, so the person has a budget constraint and the person wants some things. So given that budget constraint, we were maximizing this utility function, and the Homo economicus was very rational about it because she knew that, okay, I want these things, and all I care about are these things, and this is my budget constraint, and I'm going to rationally optimize my utility. That means I'll be maximizing my utility function given the set of constraints, right? Next, please. Uh, okay, so these, as we saw, most of what we did in undergrad was about pecuniary motivation. So pecuniary is anything monetary or economic. Okay, so the usual arguments of a utility function. So what are the arguments of a utility function? F any function. So you have a y, and then whatever x that y is determined by. So whatever is there on the x-axis are the arguments of the function. Okay, so you have, say, the number of apples on the x-axis, so going from 0 to infinity, and then you have your derived utility on the y-axis, right? So with one apple you have some utility, with two apples you have some other utility, the concept of marginal utility and all that, right? So up till now what we focused in undergraduation was that these quantities on the x-axis are in some sort monetary or economic or pecuniary, right? There could be income, so I derive certain utility from so much income. I derive utility from consumption in this period, and then I also want to consume in the next period, so I save some amount. These kinds of objects went into the utility function. Over time, as economics proceeded, non-pecuniary items were also added. So economists realized that humans not only humans don't care about only money. right? Or only consuming, or only saving. So a human mind cares about a lot of things, right? And because of the framework of utility functions that we have developed over time, a lot of things can be added to that. All right. So starting with Gary Becker, what happened was, so he realized that humans can also have tastes for other things. So first of all, he introduced that humans can have a taste for discrimination also. So that's a, if I am allowed to offer, I'll offer you a course called Economics of Discrimination, in which we'll talk about these topics in detail. But he just said that you can have a taste for discrimination. You may just prefer. It could be a preference that you do not like someone, or you do not like a group of people, right? It could be a matter of your taste. It could be a matter of your taste, how many children you want. You want children, you don't want children, you want one, you want 10. It is a matter of your preference. So these are non-pecuniary motivations, right? These do not come from your income, or your consumption. These are something else that humans care about in real world, right? You could also want to be altruistic. So parents, even though for a long time they don't derive any pecuniary benefits from their children, but they are altruistic towards their children. You're also altruistic towards people from whom you do not derive pecuniary motivations, right? You want to do charity. You see something, you want to contribute to the society. So this is also a part of human motivation that was not covered in economics. And slowly, starting with Gary Becker, these things um, started to be included in what people can have a taste for. And then these also became arguments of the utility function. So these also started appearing on the x-axis, right? And then you derive utility from them on the y-axis. All right. Now, so this is when economics went beyond your savings and income and your macroeconomic variables. It also went on to discuss non-economic motives, and that's where the development economics comes to, where you discuss about what are the issues in developing countries, which go beyond the GDP and the state GDP. It also talks about the general things that are happening in the society, and what kind of behavior and what kind of motive drives that, right? So this was when the argument set was expanded. Then another set of economists came in and said that, see, hey, humans are not always rational in the mathematic sense that in which we like them to be in economics. Okay, there are a lot of things that a human misjudges or miscalculates. There is something called cognitive bias. There are other psychological aspects that can act as constraints on when you maximize your utility function. So this is when these economists said that, okay, a human is not perfect, and there could be certain biases in the thought process, and we have to incorporate that when we study them. Okay, this is what Professor Dhitiman Gupta will talk to you about. I'm not sure if that's in the MA prestige program, but if you can attend, that will be good. So, but throughout all this, the basic assumption was that whatever these tastes and preferences are, whatever you have a taste for apples or you have a taste for discrimination, these are individual characteristics, okay? And these are independent of the social context in which you're looking at. So whenever you see a problem in economics so far, what you've seen is that there's an individual, he has certain preference, certain constraints, and you're asked to solve that, right? But as obvious as this is, as it is important, you have to realize that whatever um, tastes and preferences and behaviors and decisions that anyone makes is always uh, conditioned by their social context, right? To give you an example, um, so right now I am taking a lecture. So I have more knowledge about this subject than you guys do, and therefore I am a teacher for you right now, and my behavior is dependent on this social context. I will not behave the same as I behave with my friends. I'll not behave with them the same as I behave with my parents, right? Similarly with you guys, okay? You people will be very different in a class as opposed to just before I would enter the class, right? Other example, girls and boys, of course, they are biologically different, but they behave very differently. And it is all conditioned by the social context, because girls are expected to behave in a certain way, boys are expected to behave in a certain way, right? Boys in India are expected to behave in a certain way, which is very different from the boys in the US. They are still boys, they are still girls. Indian girls behave very differently from girls in Pakistan. North Indian girls behave differently from South Indian girls. They're still girls. But the social context uh, defines how you behave, right? And it is this thing that is added by, this is what identity economics adds. Okay, this is what is the novel thing that it might seem very obvious, but just realize that in the 3 years of undergraduation that you've done, these things have not been talked about. Okay, so as obvious as it is something new that the economists have realized, and then these things are being added. Okay, so let's talk about, so what is identity? Identity economics. What how do you define identity? So a loose way to say that, loose and as good as it gets, it's a notion of who we are vis-a-vis the people around us, vis-a-vis the society in which we live. Okay, it's an idea of who we are, who we believe we are, and how we stand among the people who are around us. So this is a central role for social context. Okay, so how this flow chart can explain it better. So there's a society, whichever level you want to define a society at. You can define it at the world level, you can define it at a national level, Indian society, or you can say societies in Haryana, or you can say, um, whatever society we have at Jindal. Okay, so whatever society that is, the society divides people into social categories. Now, see, when I say social categories, and also I say that gender is a social category, it's not a biological gender category that we are talking about. We are talking about gender as a social category. We are talking about all the categories that the society decides, and how it is different than biological, because biologically there are no norms for behavior, right? So when a society divides its residents, its inhabitants into social categories, it also defines norms for their behavior. It defines that certain people should behave a certain way. It also defines how you should behave with other people. Okay, so there are also definitions, implicit, explicit, in all forms, but there are set rules uh, of your own behavior, as well as your interaction with people, or with other people. Okay, and this in turn influences every decision that you make in life, and of course that includes economic decisions. Okay, so to give you an example, I'll get to more economic examples later, but to give you an example, consider the concept of fairness. Okay, so there's a lot of literature. I also saw that maybe you guys have also done a course on fairness, what is fair. But even as something as basic as fairness is largely driven by social context. Can anyone tell me how, or can think of how this is? How can fairness be different depending on the social context? Anyone? Don't worry, it doesn't have to be very explicit. I just want to know that you guys are here. Anyone? Come on, I'll be teaching you, and I don't want this silence in the class. Okay, you can also say that you don't have an example. That's okay. So consider fairness. Okay, um, what do we know about US right now? We know that it was considered fair um, at some time in the US to treat blacks unequally. Right? It was fair. It was legal. right? It is considered fair in India um, to treat certain castes differentially than your own. It is also considered fair on the part of people to expect that people will marry within their own caste. It's fair to expect because that's the norm, right? So, as basic concept as fairness is driven by the social context. Now, let's come to more concrete economic examples. Gender, as I said. Now, I gave you an example about how girls are expected to behave, how boys are expected to behave, depending on the gender. Now, let's see how that can affect economic decisions. Okay. Now, education and how much education to get. It's an economic decision, right? It's an investment. You invest in your education, and then you go to the job market, you go to the labor market, and then you derive income from the investment that you made. Right? You made an investment in yourself. That's how, in economics of education, you view education. Education is an investment. You invest something, later on you derive dividends from it. Okay. Now, given that in India, uh, the female labor force participation is very low, due to whatever reason. Now, let's not, it doesn't matter that what the reason is. What matters is that the social context defines or uh, you know, um, says that the role of women in India is to stay at home. Whatever. It doesn't, you don't have to agree with it. You don't, it's not something to be contested, it's just a fact. Most of the women in India stay at home. So that is how the gender roles are defined in India. Okay. Now this drives how much you study and what fields you study, and this in turn defines what outcomes you have in the labor market. Okay, and this girls in India will be very different from the girls in, say, a developed country, or will be very different from girls in, say, Pakistan, who would be making even different choices than what we do in India, right? So that is one aspect. So when you take into account that um, not only your tastes and preferences, but your decisions are also going to be affected by who you are in the society. That will impact your economic decisions, and that will impact your economic analysis after that. So you have to, suppose you're designing a policy and you just say that, लड़कियों के पास पैसे नहीं है, probably that's the problem. Give them more money, they'll study more, but that's not going to happen. That policy is going to fail because money is not the problem, right? So you have to, uh, money is not the only problem. So you have to look at each problem um, in a context of the society. Okay. Again, race, as I said, so there is a lot of literature on discrimination against blacks and all that, but at the same time you have to also realize that even when you give them the same kind of opportunities, blacks may still choose to do different things because um, whatever society they are living in, there are certain expectations of them. And it's not easy to deviate, and in general the entire community will not deviate. Okay. Similarly, ethnicity, nationality, because you identify yourself as Indian, a lot of people in India make the economic decision of going into the armed forces, right? That's an economic decision that affects your family, that affects your income, that affects your lifetime earnings, right? Caste, another, this is very particular to India. um, Functional roles. What do I mean by functional roles? There are also ways in which people identify themselves in an organization. Okay, so you have a boss, you have a worker, you have someone who's a peon, right? There are different ways in which you behave with each, and there are different ways in which this in turn will affect their economic decisions, right? So why is this useful? What is the, as I said, first of all, this is what reality is like, right? That you do not make decisions in a vacuum, and that is what we need to realize if we are to, because economics is a social science. It's of course we have a language of mathematics in which we define our problems more precisely, and in which it's beautiful language because it is elegant, it is concise, but still we must not forget that what we are trying to model are imperfect beings who are living, who are not living in isolation or in vacuum. So this identity economics, along with behavioral economics, all these what these are helping us to do is to create more realistic models of human behavior. And these models, in turn, are better at predicting public behavior and response. It's because these are grounded in social context. Okay, so as a policy maker, you're coming to a policy school, public policy school. So as a policy maker, how am I doing in time? All right. So as a policy maker, you want to know how real people behave. You don't want to know that in the textbook someone had a preference for apples, and in a vacuum they just made a decision based on their budget constraint. You have to know that probably if those people go and buy apples in the market, they'll be beaten to death. Happens in a lot of places, happens to a lot of castes, happens to a lot of races. Even though a person likes apples, would not buy apples, right? So, and that's one thing for policymakers. There are also business strategists who predict people's behavior because they want to increase their sales, they want to target the right kind of people. Who will buy their product. They want to see that, how people, what kinds of people are browsing their products, what kinds of people are spending more time, what kind of people are actually making the expenditure. So they will be able to better model human behavior because these people are humans. These people don't know that there's a textbook written for them and they have to behave in a rationally optimizing way, right? They are real people and they'll make mistakes and they will behave according to social context, right? So when you incorporate these things in your analysis, you will be able to make better predictions about a society that is imperfect, right? So to just draw parallels with what we have been doing up till now in undergraduation in the conventional economics. So in conventional economics, you identify individuals as buyers and sellers. So there's a market and you know that someone is a buyer, someone is a seller. Okay. In identity economics, you further identify these individuals into social categories. Then in conventional economics, the next step is that you define what is the setup. You define that, okay, this is the technology, so this is the kind of prices that will be, this is the market structure, is it a monopoly, it's a perfect competition, it's a oligopoly, what kind of prices, that will also define the prices, what is the supply structure, right? Similarly, in identity economics, you will define the setting. So you will define that, okay, this social category has to follow these norms, and these are the norms for interactions between different social categories, right? Then the third step you took in conventional economics then was to optimize. So you computed the individual gains and losses from the actions that people do in the market. So they decide prices, they decide quantities, they decide how much to buy, how much to sell, right? Similarly, in identity economics, after having defined the categories and the norms, then you compute the individual gains and losses, because the decisions which you will be making in this market will be influenced by the identities and norms, right? So that is the end of my presentation. And any questions? Now, come on, this is your time. So this is basically, yes, Yashovardhan, this is basically meant for you to get an idea about what there is, and then hopefully subsequently study more about it, right? Okay, Yashovardhan, come on.
Hello, ma'am. I just wanted to ask that these identities are also not working in a vacuum, right? Like these are being affected by the institutions that surround them, like the law that sort of restricts their identity or like
Definitely,
elevates their
definitely.
identity. So does that also come into the modeling part of it, or is it like uh, an assumption that is taken care of?
So that depends on your problem, Yashovardhan. Suppose you want to study the education decisions of students in a school. So that is one of the papers that I was working on, and probably I can discuss it with you all. Uh, we were looking at what stream choice decisions students make, right? So what I find is that in India, boys are much more likely to opt for sciences, the whatever your physics, chemistry, mathematics, science courses, mathematically oriented courses, girls are more likely to opt for, even within sciences, they are more likely to opt for biology, okay, life sciences, zoology, or the arts courses or the commerce courses. Okay, so um, a lot of things, and a lot of countries have studied it, and in India very few people have studied it, so that's what we were planning, that let's see what happens in India. So what I find is that, so the first thing that comes to mind, okay, um, girls may not be as good in maths as boys are. So it's just that, जो जिसमें अच्छा है वो वही कर रहा है, right? Boys are better in maths, so they choose subjects that are mathematically demanding, and girls are better at, say, English languages, तो वो वही कर रही हैं, right? When you statistically analyze this, that is not the case. That cannot explain any part of the gender gap that we see. Okay, then बहुत सारी चीजें हमने explore की. We also looked at that the peers. Then again, it's the social context. So, the kind of peers that you have, the kind of teachers that you have, or um, I don't know, your socio-economic characteristics. Okay, a lot of these things, सब मिला जुला के, it can only explain around 30% of the gender gap. So 70% of the gender gap that we observe in the take-up of these subjects is unexplained by the variables that I can see that economics can capture. So what are these differences? Now, one is that maybe girls don't like maths, right? So, but you have to understand after this that, there is a social context behind it. There is a certain expectation from girls, there is a certain expectation from boys. Probably boys don't take biology because they are expected to start earning much earlier in their life. And biology has a very long gestation period. So, of course, your identities are defined by the social context, and it depends on the problem that you're looking at that, up to which depth you want to look at. But the important thing is that you recognize the social context and not um, analyze individuals in a vacuum. Anyone else? So does this field of economics seem interesting to you guys?
Yes, ma'am.
Excellent. So I think my job is partly done. Anyone else?
Uh,
Aliva?
Someone else also had a question, so should I
That's
go
okay.
first?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
I don't see any hand. Yeah.
Okay. So the question was basically that these identities that we are working here and trying to model are coming from their choices. Uh, but
A lot of times. Hmm?
any identity's choice itself is a lot of times not only about that identity, but its peripherist identities. Like a parent makes a choice for the child, so the choice is reflected in the child, but
But
it's indirectly made by a parent.
right. You're very, very like uh, right on thing. So a lot of times these identities we don't choose for ourselves, and a lot of times we are able to choose. Okay, so as in the education example, and I think that's what you were saying, that my parents, a lot of times in India, we also are not able to, like, लड़कियां खुद नहीं choose करती कि मेरे को नहीं पढ़ना है. Parents just might just tell them, or may just decide for them कि क्या करोगे साइंस पढ़ के, you just do your arts and just finish your school and go. What you have to realize is that even this, so that's the whole crux of the matter, that unless you realize this, you will not be able to get to the bottom of these problems. You have to realize that whatever parents are also coming from somewhere, right? Parents are also saying that because they know कि आगे चलकर हम इसको नहीं पढ़ाएंगे या शादी के बाद ये जॉब नहीं कर पाएगी, तो why invest? This is an economic decision. They have to make an economic decision about investing in their child, and that comes from whatever the society is expecting, whatever the society is, the current state of the society is, the current market is, everything. So yeah, you're right. Sometimes we make those decisions. A lot of times we don't make those decisions. That's the point of it. So consider transgenders, for example. Can they make a decision about their career? No, they cannot. Are they any different than us? No, it's the social context. A lot of countries have given them an identity, and now they are having a much more wider set of options. But in India, they don't. It's not their choice, right?
Uh,
Samvid. Yes. Sorry, Samvid.
okay,
Give me a
okay,
second.
sorry.
Yes.
So basically the idea is, so here when we say uh, an identity, do we separate these people out to be like the people who are influenced by someone else, or do we consider these people as individual identities itself?
What do you mean by individual identity?
Like so when I'm looking at their choices, do I say
Hmm.
these people are probably like, do I take into consideration while modeling that these people are probably influenced by someone's uh choices, or
See, from a modeling perspective, when you are defining a model, you can make assumptions, right? You can make assumption that children do not make education investment decisions on their own. Parents make education investment decisions for the children. So in your model, your parents will be um, your working puppets, and children will be just a decision parameter, right? In the real world, then it depends on what kind of data you have. Okay, and suppose you want to do an empirical analysis using econometrics, then it depends what kind of data you have. Do you have data on parents? Then you look at it from the point of view of parents. Do you have data on students? Then you look at it from the point of view of students, and accordingly, then you suppose you're making a program, and you suppose your aim as a policymaker is to increase the number of girls in science. Okay, and then you go to the school, you see कि ऐसा है नहीं ले रही हैं तो क्या करें हम school जाके we will just give them an orientation program. We'll try to get them interested in science, and we'll try to um, tell them the scope of science, blah 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 blah. What you have ignored here? You've ignored the social context. You've ignored that these decisions are not made in the vacuum of school. These decisions are coming from way back. And this is also decisions considering the future. So, as a policymaker, when you incorporate these context in your study, you will realize that you are hitting the wrong spot. You need to target somewhere else. Okay? Often this is not easy, and there's no one solution to everything. But once you realize that there is a social context, uh, human behavior, you're better able to understand. Okay. Okay. Somewhere.
Ma'am, my question is a little similar to Aliva's, but there's
Hmm.
a second part to it.
Hmm.
So, there's a social context where someone else makes a decision for me,
Hmm.
but has there been a case where the modeling could have incorporated that my decision, I mean,
Hmm.
the decisions that someone else has taken for me has actually affected someone else? So,
Hmm.
sort of an externality. So, I'm talking in the case of like Afghanistan, there's the situation of Bacha Posh, where the family decides whether the eldest girl in the house will socially come out as a boy or as a girl.
Hmm.
And that decision in turn affects whether the other siblings, primarily girls, will get education or not. So, is there a way of modeling that externality?
Of course there is. So, I mean, these details we can, and that's a very interesting question to follow up in research, or probably in your master's thesis. So, of course, we can model it. Depends on. So there would be we can do a you can do a two-stage model. We can do primary decision maker as the parent, and then we can do subsequent actions that are taken by the girl, or who comes out as a girl, as a boy, whatever. And um, depending on what the decision was made, there could be two streams of actions that can be two streams of strategy sets that can be taken up by that particular person. So of course there's a way to model that, and of course we can also take into, so the two streams will kind of define the social context for that, because when you come out as a boy, you have a different set of norms to follow. You come out as a girl, you have a different set of norms to follow. So then, depending on where you come out, depending on the first like the top of the tree decision, then you have subsequent actions, and then you have subsequent decisions to make, and so on. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Anyone else? It is 11:57. Lalit, I think I will have to stop, and it's my bad. I agree. But anyways, quickly you can ask a question. All right, so we are done here. And so you guys are all joining the MA Eco program from second. It's starting from second, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I think I'll see you either on second or on third. Great. All right, have a good day, everyone. And thank you so much, Lalit, and thank you for bearing with me.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank
Bye
you, ma'am.
bye. See you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye. Thanks, Lalit. Bye.